Spicy Fox here, and I'm going to be teaching you how to play Pathfinder Dungeons and Dragons. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do in order to play this game is you need to have a core rulebook. Now, I'm not going to say how you should acquire such a core rulebook considering that the thing is worth $50. But if you get the information from however source you find it, good for you. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get yourself some dice. Because if you don't have the dice, then you can't very well play the game. And yeah, usually dungeon masters have like a huge box full of dice, but really it's just good to have your own and not always mooching off of someone else. Now, there are several different kinds of dice that you need to get. And normally, if you go to a dice shop or a game shop or something like that, they usually sell them in the complete set. But for those of you who don't know what dice to get specifically, you would think that I would have this already pre-planned and ahead of time. You need about 7 different kinds of dice. You need this one, which is D20. It has 20 sides on it. You need this one, which has 10 sides. This specifically has 2 numbers on it, in which case you use this for rolling 100 percentile things. I'll explain that a bit later. This one has single digits on it, and it's also a 10-sided dice, or a D10. This one is a D12. Not many people really use this one, unless you're a barbarian, but even then, it's rare you'll ever use a D12. The standard 6-sided die, or D6, and a D4. Rarely used as well, but, you know, it's always good to have a D4 on hand. And an 8-sided dice. These are usually for archers because a lot of their arrow damage is done in D8s. Quick explanation for the D100 percentiles. Effectively, you roll 2 D10s, the one with 2 digits and the one with 1 digit. And then, let's say you get a 40, and then, well, a 9. A 40 and a 9. That's clearly 49. Self-explanatory. I usually say get one with 2 digits just because it's easier to keep track of your percentiles when you're rolling 2 d10s at the same time. Now, I keep saying that a lot. The next thing you need to do is think of a class that you want to play as. Now, in Dungeons and Dragons, there are a multitude of classes you can play as. Now, as I said, get a core rulebook because they have all the classes in there. But there are also extended universes where they have more classes. Now, it also depends on your dungeon master whether or not you can play the extended classes, because it also depends on whether or not they have the information available to them and whether or not it messes with their campaign ideas or not. Personally, as a DM, I go with core classes just because that's what I'm most comfortable with. However, if you show me the rules of your class, I usually allow it. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to go over the quick classes. There's Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, and Wizard. Which class you should pick effectively is based on which is ever inherent in your personality. If you like to be the more fighter, smashy types, then people usually go for the fighters, the barbarians. Monks can also be melee-based, paladins, but mostly people just go with either barbarians or fighters when they're just going for flat smash. Bards, they're more based on charisma, in which they use their cunning linguistics in order to persuade people to do whatever they want. And they're usually the people that you bring along whenever you're going into a town and you need to gather up information on the lore or try and persuade someone to go along with your party's interests, whatever. Cleric, they're obviously the ones that heal. However, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to heal. There are clerics that can pick abilities that are primarily used for destroying undead, or just spreading the word of their gods, but they don't necessarily have to heal people. In fact, there are clerics that can do negative energy damage in which they just harm. Those are usually more along the lines of evil-based classes, but there can be good paladins that use the evil-based magic. You'd have to have a really good backstory for a DM to normally allow that, or just a really lax DM. There's several kinds of DMs. There's DMs that either base more along the lines of roleplay, base more along the lines of statistics, and I go more along roleplay as opposed to statistics, but I kind of do a bit of a mix. Druids, they also can heal, but they're like the cleric, but they, instead of god, they go more towards nature. They can have animal companions. They can't use any metallic type items like weapons or armor, so they're more nature based. Anything metal is usually against their religion, as it were. But like I said, they can also heal. They don't have to heal. Paladins, they can also heal, but paladins are specifically lawful, and there's a thing where my previous DM calls it lawful butthole, in which case they're just complete jerks. That's true, they can be, but that's not always the case. But it's, anything lawful can't be in a party with someone who's evil, clearly, because they would butt heads. It would go against their, well, not necessarily their religion, but it would go against their moral code. Effectively, paladins play more towards their moral beliefs and the law that they follow. Rangers, they use bows and arrows, and they do a lot of, bows and arrows. Not much to explain there. Oh, they also do a lot of tracking. Rogues, they're the utility knife of the party. They do things like pick locks. They sneak around, do critical hit damage. Assassins, but not necessarily. They can be thieves, or they can just effectively they can take the place of the bard, and they can use their charisma to persuade people to do what is, well, not necessarily interest for the party, but the rogue's personal interest. Sorcerers and wizards, I class them together, but my previous DM is particularly classist against sorcerers, and I can understand why, because he knows a sorcerer, which is the person who played the sorcerer was a bit of an idiot and just rubbed him the wrong way, so as such he kind of has a bit of a negative opinion towards sorcerers, and he thinks wizards are better. And really, it doesn't matter. It's a personal opinion, whether you like sorcerers or wizards. The difference between the two is sorcerers know their spells, and then they can cast them more freely at will, whereas wizards have to read from a book in order to cast their spell, but once they've casted the spell, it's gone from their mind, and they have to reread it from the book in order to prepare it for the next day or whatever. But they're more utility based, in which case they can put any spell they want into a book and then prepare any number of spells that day, whereas sorcerers are more fixed in their knowledge. However, each level you can change the spells that you know for a new set of list. So it's really whether you want to be more fluent in your casting or whether you want more variety in your casting. When you think about your classes, you should, well, my previous DM did kind of play with alignments, but generally not. Effectively, if you're going to play your character based on alignment rather than based on who you are as a person, you think, okay, am I going to follow the law more? Am I going to follow my own personal beliefs? Am I going to just wander around and then see how things go and then follow along with other people and just kind of go along with the group? Am I going to do things more for my personal interest / for a law, like more evil-based? Okay, effectively, evil is your own personal selfish interests. That doesn't necessarily mean you're doing bad things, you're just doing things that are more beneficial to your interests. Neutral people, they don't really care. about their personal interest, about anyone else's personal interest. They're just going along for the living. And then lawful people are going for whatever the law is. And chaotic people kind of just do whatever. They're just random beyond all reason. Alright, now I'm going to give you a minute, and I just want you to think about what kind of character class that you want to create. And let's see here. While you're thinking up of your character class, you're going to need 4 d6s. In order to make your class, sometimes people roll their dice first and then see what their see what kind of stats they get before they make a class, but that doesn't always help. Anyway, in the core rulebook, it tells you several different ways you can roll for your class. There are the easier, more normal mode rollings, and then there's the more hard mode rollings. For example, usually you start off with rolling 4 dice, you take the 3 higher numbers, and then that becomes your stat. As a house rule, that means a rule specifically played by me as a DM, I re-roll 1 results, so it gives you a better chance of getting a better number. For the more harder modes, there are rules where you can just roll 3 dice as opposed to 4, and then there are rules where you can just roll 1 dice or 2 dice to make it like really difficult. But yeah, you're going to want to roll 4 d6s, and you're going to do that a number of 6 times because you have 6 stats. You have strength, charisma, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, and constitution. This is a standard Pathfinder sheet. Normally when I print them out, I like to print it front and back, but the person who printed this off printed it on 2 pieces of paper. That's easier, I suppose, if you want to have your sheets out like this, but personally, I like it just 1 sheet of paper because it's less clutter and less trees killed. I would be a druid. No, personally, I prefer sorcerers. So after you have your 6 stats rolled, you can roll these as many times as you want. I'm not picky. You can roll several sets of 6 and then pick which set that you think are the best. On here, my rolls were 12, 16, 12, 17, 15, and 17. And since I'm a sorcerer, I'm going to put those points into charisma, because sorcerers are more charisma based. I'm not going to go through each class and explain them because everything you need to know is in the book. I am going to, however, go through each list on here and explain how to figure out what stats go where. But yeah, as I was saying, as a sorcerer, I put 12 into strength because I'm not going to be doing a lot of physical fighting. 16 into dexterity because a lot of my spells are based on range, and also since I'll be dodging spells if I'm ever fighting another caster, that'll also be based on my dexterity. Constitution, it's just good to have a decent constitution so that way you have more hit points. I know in before Pathfinder came out, sorcerers had D4 hit points, so they were very weak when it came to survival. 17 in intelligence just because it gives me more skill points. 15 in wisdom just so I have at least a decent will save. Sorcerers have a higher will save level up per their class anyway, so that's why I didn't put more points into wisdom, but just a bit more so that I have a decent will save. There's a chart earlier on in the book. I can't remember what page it is on, but as a DM, they'll show you where the chart is. Each stat has something called a modifier. That is, these are your base stats. Ignore where it says ability score. These are your base stats, but a lot of what the game deals with are ability modifiers. So, for example, a 12 is a +1 ability modifier. There's a chart in the front of the book. 10 and 11 is 0, 12 and 13 is 1, 14, 15 is 2, and so on and so forth. Effectively, every 2 points is 1 point modifier. So a lot of times for example, let's say you're rolling a perception check. Effectively, you roll your d20, you add your wisdom modifier, which mine's a 15, so it'd be a +2. And then you add whatever ranks that you've put into it. So that's effectively what a modifier does. It increases your roll to be more effective. AC, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's whatever armor you get plus whatever shield you have plus your dexterity modifier. So in this case, it'd be a +3 because it's a 16. Your size modifier, medium sizes get +0 for their modifier, larges get a -1, and small gets a +1 because the smaller you are, the more harder it is to hit. The larger you are, the more easier it is to hit you. Natural armor, that's usually for things like dragons. They have a natural thick hide to themselves, so they get natural armor bonuses. Deflection modifier, that's for things like bracers of armor. And miscellaneous modifier, I would probably say miscellaneous modifier would be like a ring of protection. A ring of protection effectively creates a force energy, and that's different than deflection because there are these incorporeal creatures that can go through physical armor, and so it's based on your dexterity then. But because they're incorporeal, they can't go through any kind of force object. So a shield like Ring of Protection or a level 1 spell that sorcerers know, Shield, which gives you +4 AC because it's an energy field. They can't go through that. So I would put that under miscellaneous modifier. Initiative, it's your dexterity modifier plus miscellaneous modifier. For example, the feat improved initiative gives you a +4 to your initiative modifier. So it would be 3 + 4, and plus your d20 roll. Initiatives are rolled as a DM's way of keeping track of who goes in what turn during fights. But when you're not in combat, then if you're just going around a town and talking, then the orders are just whoever's doing what whenever they feel like it. But in a order of fight, everything's based off of your initiative. Flat-footed, that would be if you were flanked, so you don't get your dexterity bonus. There are a lot of different things that rogues get which cause a person to be flat-footed, so they lose their dexterity modifier, and then your AC, your armor class, is just based on whatever you get from your armor. Touch effectively is dexterity only, so you don't get any benefits from your armor. A lot of sorcerers and wizards, their spells are, well, okay, not just sorcerers and wizards, druids and clerics as well, use something called a ranged touch attack, and effectively it ignores the armor class and goes straight into the, well, okay, not the armor, it ignores the armor itself, but not the dexterity, because you can dodge a spell, but it's going to hit your armor and it's going to do more damage because casters don't effectively get a very high base attack bonus, but that's also why, because they're not meant to be really physical with weapons, they're more meant to be casting spells. If you take a minute to look into the class that you've chosen, you'll notice in the chart how it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down your level, and then the next column it said it has like, for example, a fighter it would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but for a rogue it would be like 0, 1, 2, and then for a caster it'd be like 0, 1, 1, 1. That's your base attack bonus effectively. Let's see where does it go on here? Under here it says base attack bonus. That's where you would put that number. That's what you use for when you're making an attack roll. Let's say Fighter A swings his sword at enemy A. Well, you roll a d20, add your base attack bonus, and then since it was a physical attack, you add your strength bonus as a fighter, and then if that beats the opponent's AC, then it hits them. If it matches their AC, then tie goes to the defender. And then if it doesn't hit, and then anything else is just a miss. If you roll a 1, it's called a critical failure, and any number of things can happen, from your weapon like flying out of your hand, a bowstring snapping, or you tripping, or something negative effectively that the DM has to come up with per the situation. If you roll a 20, it's called a critical success. There's a rule where if you roll a critical, you have to roll again, and then if you beat the AC, it's called a critical check. Then it was a critical. But if it doesn't beat the AC a second time, then it was just a regular attack. I don't do that. If it's a critical, it's a critical, because rolling a 1 out of a 20 or whatever, because some classes have abilities that decrease the critical, so you could roll like a 17 and get a critical. But in those cases, you're usually facing a lot harder creatures, so I'd say if you roll a critical, you roll a critical. That's a house rule for me. CMD, CMB, that's effectively your grappling modifiers. For example, let's say, Fighter A is going to grab enemy B. So it's your base attack bonus plus your strength modifier, and then the total of that is your CMB. And then CMD is your base attack bonus plus your strength modifier plus your dexterity modifier plus 10. And if the CMB beats the enemy CMD, then they're grappled. But if they don't, then the grapple fails. The next thing I'm going to bring up are the hit points. Each class has a specific hit die. Sorcerers in Pathfinder have been upgraded, and wizards, I suppose, have been upgraded to D6s. Fighters have D10s. And what that means is each level you roll that D dice, and then that gets added to your hit points. And then each level your Constitution modifier gets also added to your hit points. But on the first level, you get the flat D10 for your hit points. For example, fighter, first level, they have 10 hit points, plus their Constitution modifier. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But at level 2, you roll a D10, and then whatever that number is, you add to your hit points, plus your Constitution modifier. Personally, what I like to do is I like to keep track of each hit point that I roll for each level, because it makes it easier for me to figure out, because there are certain things in the game which cause negative levels, where you might drop a few levels, or if you had died and then been resurrected, you lose a level. My DM never really played by that lose a level rule very much, because there would be a lot of people that would die often, and I wouldn't. I did die about 9 times with that one character, but he usually gave me the benefit of the doubt, because a lot of the times that I was killed was because of somebody else's stupidity, and he didn't really like those other people in the party member. But like I was saying, it's just easier for you to figure out what your hit points were at what level if you keep track of each hit point. And plus, if you make a mistake about what your hit points are, you can go back and see where your mistake is. So I just roll, figure out the numbers, and then add that up, and then I add up my my hit points from the roll separate from my hit points added with the Constitution, because there are some abilities which will drain your Constitution, causing the modifier to be less, and that would also significantly change the number of your hit points. Speed, everyone starts off at 30 feet per round, which is effectively 6 squares. 6 square movement is one full action in a game, in a combat. DR stands for damage reduction. Certain classes, certain items give you a damage reduction, whereas, like, let's say you have a damage reduction of 9 and somebody does 10 damage. Effectively, you would only get hit with 1 point of damage because of the damage reduction. There's a chart that tells you what the deities are, what they say which deity is a god of. Like Nethys, I think, is either the god of sorcery and magic, or that could be the goddess of art and lust. I forget. I have to look it up again. I haven't really checked that much in the Pathfinder. I was more into 3.5, but DMing's DMing. You just need a core book. Anyway, pick the deity that generally goes more towards your class, but you don't have to. You don't even have to have a deity. Hell, if the DM lets you, you can create a completely random deity and then just have that as your deity and just spread the word. It's like, believe in this god. But if a person's just being stupid, just to be stupid, then, by all means, as a DM, penalize them. But not too harshly, because, people are meant to have fun with this game. Alright, for skills, there's a list of skills in your particular class section. It will tell you which skills you're proficient with. For example, a sorcerer, they're proficient with bluff, craft, fly, because they have spells that will allow them to fly. Knowledge, arcana, spellcraft. Those are the skills where if you put 1 rank into it, it's 1 rank. But if you're not proficient with a skill, then it's 2 ranks, or it's 2 ranks per 1 skill point. I don't really have any advice for skills, because it's really whatever you want. I mean, I usually try to put a couple of points in perception because you're going to need perception. It's important to look, hear, search, that sort of thing. In 3.5 and below, perception used to be search, listen, and I forget what the third one was, but it was split off into 3 different skills. This time they just boiled it down into 1 skill, which is really nice. Certain classes have more skills that they're proficient with. For example, rogues, they know things like acrobatics, bluff, appraise, craft, diplomacy, disable device, disguise, escape artist, handle animal, heal, intimidate. I don't know which knowledge they have, but they also have like linguistics, perception, perform, profession, ride, just a whole slew of them. Languages, they're in the book. Everyone's proficient in common unless you're playing a class or a race. Unless you're playing a race that specifically is not proficient with common. For example, like if for some unknown reason you are playing an abyssal character, they're not likely to know common because they've lived on the abyssal plane most of their lives. So what's common? they're going to know Abyssal. Human races, they're more proficient with knowing languages, so they get a bonus language per intelligence modifier, so they could know, in addition to common, they could know Elven. Oh, they can't know Druid. Okay, this is important. No one can learn Druid except Druids. If anyone learns Druid that's not a Druid, it's the job of the Druid to go out of their way and murder that person. Just saying. Opinions may vary. Draconic, Undercommon, things like that. Alright, now moving on to the back of this. Feats. What can I really say about feats? Go to the page that has feats, 112. They'll tell you everything you need to know. There's a nice little chart in that section that lists each feat and what it does and what the prerequisite of it to take that feat is. If you don't know what a feat does, go into the feat descriptions. It tells you there. Oh, also, page 86. That gives you a description of the skills, and that tells you what each skill specifically does. So if you don't know what a skill does, go to page 87 and look at the descriptions for that skill. It just read. Page 224 for sorcerers and wizards. That's a beautiful page for you because that's, well, okay, sorcerers, wizards, druids, and clerics. Oh, and bards. Bards also get spells, but they're severely limited by the spells that they can cast. Point being, 224. That gives you the spell lists, L-I-S-T-S. Spell descriptions on 239. That gives you all the spell descriptions. All of them. If you don't know what a spell does, each spell description, each spell is described after the spell on the list, but that doesn't tell you what the spell save is, what the long-term effects are, what kind of range it has. You need to go to 239 and look up the spell description. So, there's a lot. Trust me, I know. The first character I ever played was a sorcerer. So, what did I do? I looked on the list. I was like, okay, this spell does this. Nah. This spell does this. Nah. This spell. Ooh, I like the way this sounds. Flipped to the back of the book, read it a little bit more, understood what the spell did, wrote it down, and then that became my spell. And then I just kept. And then as you keep playing the game over and over again, you get better and better, and then you just learn how to play the game. For caster classes, there's a corner here that says spell DC, spells known, spells per day, bonus spells. Remember that chart at the beginning of the book that I told you about that told you 10 and 11 is a +0, 12 and 13 is a +1? After that, there's the box that gives you that chart. There are more numbers there. There's like 0 for, well, not 0, but first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Those are bonus spells. That means because I have a 17 charisma with a +3 modifier, that means after, if I follow along that line, I get a certain number of bonus spells. Like, I don't remember what the chart is, and I don't have it written down here because this is an incomplete character sheet. But for example, I get +1 more first level spell that I know. I get +1. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. That's +1 more spell that I can cast per day for first level spells. Spells per day. That's also in the book for your character class. Wizards, usually they can only cast a maximum of 4 once they get high enough level. Sorcerers can only cast a maximum of 6 once they get high enough level. Spells known, that's specifically for sorcerers. That's also in the section for sorcerers on page 70. They, like I said earlier, they can only know so many spells. Well, for 0th level spells, at maximum, they can know 9 0th level spells. First level, they know 5. Second level, they know 5. And then it goes like 4, 4, 4, and then 3 for the rest of, for like 6th, 7th, and 8th. That means they can only know that number of spells. But once you get into like the 6th, 7th, and 8th, and 9th spells, the list gets significantly shorter. And so most of your casting interest is going to be between the 3rd and 6th level spells. And there are decent spells at 7, 8, and 9, but generally most of your casting is going to be between the 1st and 6th spells, the 6th levels. The spell save DC. Since sorcerers cast based on charisma, their spell save DC is 10 plus their modifier plus their spell level. For example, a 0th level spell would have a 13 spell save DC. A 1st level spell would have a 14. Then it goes up from there. So 15 at 2nd level, 16 at 3rd level, and so on and so forth. Oh, I forgot to mention something for feats. Go back for a second. For feats, you get one every other level. So 1st, 3rd, 5th, 6th, 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, and so on and so forth. Certain classes get another spell or another feat. For example, fighters get a bonus feat every other level. So 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, which makes them a little more formidable because then they can have more feats in their list. They'll be getting like 2 feats per every other character's 1 feat. Prestige classes, I'm going to just touch up on this really quick. A prestige class is something that you can class into after you've met a certain prerequisite. For example, is it on this list? Shadow Dancer, Pathfinder, Chronicler, Mystic Thurge, Lore Master, Eldritch Knight, Duelist, Dragon Disciple, Assassin, Arcane Trickster, Arcane Archer. They don't have it on here. Well, let's just say Arcane Archer. An Arcane Archer, their prerequisite would have to be they'd have to have so many levels in an arcane class like a wizard or a sorcerer, and then so many levels in a class that uses bow techniques like a ranger. Fighters can use bow techniques too because they're proficient with a lot of different weapons. They have to have a certain number of skills. They have to have a certain number of ranks in certain skills. They have to have a certain number of strength modifier, whatever. Once you reach these prerequisites, then you can go into these prestige classes. And these prestige classes are effectively a fusion between your 2 classes that you've picked. And they get benefits based on these 2, which improve your character strength. It just adds more diversity to the game because of all the things that you can customize. I think that's about it for everything that I need to say. If you have questions, let me know. But otherwise... Oh, one more thing. Weapons and armor. Go to page 461 for armor and go to 467 for weapons. That's effectively the item descriptions for the weapons and armor that you'll need. Each class is proficient with a certain number of weapons. For example, fighters are proficient with simple, melee, martial weapons, that thing. They're proficient in full plate armor, medium plate armor, whatever. Um, Sorcerers, casters like of the like, they're not proficient with any kind of armor, so they can only wear cloth. If they wear any kind of armor, they take penalties to casting spells. Like, for example, if you're wearing like a chest piece, you take like 20% spell failure. Where if you roll those two d10s, and if you roll below a 20%, your spell effectively fails. Um, uh, Sorcerers and wizards, they're two different. I know sorcerers can use simple weapons, but wizards specifically can't use certain weapons. Like, I don't know if they can use crossbows, or maybe they can. They have to use like some light crossbow or something. Anyway, it's in the class descriptions. It tells you everything you need to know. Um, as far as magical items go, those aren't something that you're going to be looking at until you get later level. By then, all I can say is just go to the pages and read the lists. Check out how much gold it's going to cost. Um, and yeah, if there's any problems, just let me know. All right, this is Spicy Fox signing out.